to touch briefly on what a pathway is. What is a biological pathway and why do we need this? Also, what is so special about how we approach pathways here at Viome, and in the release, what this means for all of our customers and how this plays a role in our personalized recommendations. We will specifically go over the example where butyrate assessment is explained. So what you see right now is a dashboard that explains some of the scores that play a role in your wellness. They all come from various microbiome data assessments. So for instance, in your results section, you see assessments from beneficial or unhealthy microbial activity and the variety or diversity of microbial activities that are found in a sample. What you also see is this statement right here that talks about butyrate pathway analysis. So actually, it gives you two separate scores. If you see where I'm hovering over, there are actually two assessments. One talks about butyrate pathway production, and one talks about the potential to produce butyrate. I will tell you right away that the production of butyrate, we are assessing based on pathway activity, and I'll explain later what this means. So this is coming from our functional data from looking at the enzymes that are overexpressed, that are making this whole process, the function of butyrate production, very active or even overly active. What this means, potential to produce, this is actually the taxonomic side, the organisms, the microbes that are known to be capable of butyrate production. We assess their activity too. So it's basically how active and what kinds of butyrate producers do you have in there. So that's why there's actually two scores, and it's the integrative assessment of these two scores that gives us an ability to assess, together with other things, your metabolic fitness and inflammatory activity. And later also, I will show you how this makes a big difference for personalizing our recommendations. So under metabolic fitness scores and the inflammatory activity score, I just want to make it very, very clear. There are multiple different pathway scores, multiple functions that we assess, and it takes into account integratively the microbial organisms, who they are, how active they are, and what they're doing. So that's where the pathways come in. And we assess all of that integratively with quite a few different metrics, and then roll out these scores like metabolic fitness and inflammatory activity. Now, butyrate is a very well-known pathway that has a lot of implications for health, and it's something that we chose to disclose and display like this in the app. A lot of our customers wonder about their butyrate levels. So this plays into both of these scores, just in slightly different manner. But just to make it very clear, there's more than just those butyrate assessments that go into metabolic fitness and inflammatory activity scores. So why we measure butyrate? There are many different health benefits of butyrate. It's a beneficial short-chain fatty acids that our microbiome can produce for us. So in the colon, various carbs like resistant starches, they can be digested by our microbes. And for instance, butyrate producers, those organisms that are capable of producing butyrate, they love taking these resistant starches that we cannot digest. So they get to the colon, not digested, and microbes get it, and they know exactly what to do with it, and they will take it, and they will make these short chain fatty acids. One of them that's really, really important is butyrate. So when they make butyrate, and butyrate is made available then for us, the hosts, this butyrate production can very positively impact the intestinal health, because our colonocytes, the cells in the colon lining, they love it. They live off of butyrate. It feeds them. It gives them energy. It improves this entire gut barrier. Butyrate also is really important for immune balance. It has a role in the gut-brain axis. It can even influence our sense of satiety, how hungry we are. It can have epigenetic effects on some of the host genes, and it can also play a role in insulin sensitivity. There are many other benefits of butyrate, and that has been really nicely shown in the current literature. So this is one of the important scores that we exposed right away. It was actually the first one that I started working on here at Viome when pathway deliverables were just getting mapped out. So now that we have butyrate production in our app, people may wonder, okay, well, can't I understand that, I have butyrate producers with other tests? What are the others do? So it's important to really get into this area where we're different from anyone else on the market. So someone may report to you that you have butyrate producers, and a customer may feel, okay, I know what they are. This is great. But what they won't know, and this is in the blue navy text, is our set of differentiators. What they won't know is how active those butyrate producers are. What they also won't know is the resolution down to the strain level, which we do at Viome. The activity of these butyrate producers is basically what the metatranscriptomic technology allows us to assess, because that's the RNA level. If it's not active and it's not transcribing RNA, then we don't really care that much because it's not actively doing anything. So RNA, as opposed to DNA, is a measure of actively transcribing organisms. Now, the next point, and this is where I get to delve into the notion of pathways more, is what are they doing? So what are those butyrate producers doing? And you might think, well, they're known as butyrate producers. Aren't they just going to be producing butyrate? But if you think about it, they might have other things to worry about in their lives. They might be under certain stress in their local environment. There may be some pathogens. There may be some other microbes that are not quite compatible with butyrate producers. They're making their lives more difficult, and they need to fight turf wars. They need to relocate. They need to worry about, making some basic structural components, for instance, for themselves, creating their membranes and things like that. So, of course, they have many different functions. They need to eat. They have their own way of eating. And that could be one of the things that can be limiting. So, for instance, how much you feed them so that they can produce butyrate for you, it can be a really critical factor. So they may or may not be actively producing a lot of butyrate. And this is what we have to realize. So even though you have some species labeled as bona fide butyrate producers, it does not mean that they're really actively making lots of butyrate for you. So what are they doing? Are they being incentivized to give you a lot of butyrate that you need? And that is what we measure with this butyrate production function, and the pathways, the molecular pathways that get assessed tell us how much as a whole on the net effect, how much butyrate production you're likely to be getting out of your microbiome. So why do we need pathways? The short answer is because it helps us further enhance and personalize our recommendations. It's completely unique to Viome, and it can tell you whether the microbes are doing something beneficial or harmful for you. These pathways can tell us hints about your digestion, what you're eating, what is going down in the colon, in the gut environment that may be not very good for you, and how much of the activities can be impactful for your immune health or digestive or metabolic areas and other functional areas. So what are the biological pathways? They are basically our best attempts to lay out on a molecular level this cause-effect that shows step by step what leads to what. So if there is a pathway of certain metabolism, it's like, how does something get in and how do we break it down? What do we need for that? There can be pathways that show how, let's say, microbes signal to each other about specific things in their environment, which can give us clues about your health as well. But basically, pathways are these directional paths, kind of like roads, so to speak, that are comprised of proven biological or biochemical interactions needed to carry out a specific function. So a specific biological or molecular function or a particular cellular process. So just to use this as an analogy, if you were to come visit San Diego and you want to visit us in the Viome San Diego office, and then we take a trip to the beautiful Coronado Island, you use Google Maps or maybe some navigator, some other GPS device, and you can have multiple routes that lead to Coronado Island. And I'm trying to actually make this an analogy for this butyrate example. So there are multiple biological routes that could lead to ultimate butyrate production. So let's say the destination or the Coronado Island is the production of actual short chain fatty acid butyrate. You can have multiple routes that lead to it. You need to see which ones are active, which ones you're actually going to take. And you can have multiple steps on the road. I mean, even Google does a really nice pathway layout kind of job, telling you step by step what the highways look like, what the turns are, and how fast or slow these segments are. So this is an analogous piece to the enzymes or the genes that we see overexpressed. Some genes can be very rate limiting or the bottlenecks, and some genes can be ones that clearly point to the next step and are easy to hop through. So all of that is taken into account with the literature curation that my group and I do. And then we can assess for any given scenario how many segments there are, how active they are, and out of all of the possible routes of getting to the final product or the final destination, how likely you are to actually get there. So if you're, for instance, on the last step and you're on the bridge already, that's a very committed step. Once you're on the bridge, you can't easily pull over or make a U-turn. You're kind of guaranteed to end up in the Coronado Island. There are genes that, once we see them really upregulated, basically once you're there on the pathway, you're pretty much guaranteed to see at least some butyrate. So even though on the map you see segments of, let's say, 0.4 miles each in multiple places, they can mean very different things. Ones that are more upstream, they can lead you to all kinds of places. There's not as much guarantee that you're going to end up in Coronado Island. But ones that are closer, like I said, on the bridge, once you're there, you're basically guaranteed to get to Coronado Island and spend at least 5 minutes there that it's going to take you to turn around in case you want to leave. So all of these different components go into the pathway scoring. So how many of the genes there are, how active they are, where they are on the pathways, which pathways are being involved, all of that goes into this assessment that tells you, you are very likely to be producing a lot of butyrate, and actually higher than most people we see. So that's the outcome that goes into the scores that you see in the app. And I basically just answered what it is that is so special is because all of this is taken into account. The lengths, the literature context, some enzymes are bidirectional, some are very committed and pointed towards a specific way on the road, and the levels of expression. So this is really important. Metagenomic technology, other technologies, unless it's transcriptomics, so the RNA level, they cannot tell you how expressed or how overexpressed any of the genes are. So the level of expression really matters. And no other commercial microbiome company can do any of these things and provide such pathway-driven insights and recommendations for their customers. So this is something that I've been really excited about, is that this field, so I come from this systems biology and pathway analysis field, is actually hitting the masses in this automated way, where some of the pathway insights are now automated from end to end and making a difference for thousands of people already as we speak. So now, here's what it looks like in the non-Google map view, the view that we're more accustomed to here under the hood. So a lot of articles summarize short-chain fatty acid production and the butyrate producers doing that and driving those pathways. And here in this example, you see butyrate. You can read the references that I provided here. There are more than one routes, like I said, and some of the commensals or the better microbes, the ones that are really good for you, prefer to use some routes, and some of the not so good guys, they actually drive down different highways and side roads to give you butyrate. So just to tell you that all of these things are very intricate, and we can assess all of that in our customers' data. So actually, if you just Googled butyrate and pathway, you would see those papers and other articles summarizing the different looks of these pathways with multiple steps that go one after another and lead to butyrate. So you can do that. And now I want to bring it back to actionability. So I said, okay, how do we take pathways and make them actionable? So to make it more clear about the recommendation side of things, it would not be, in the app if it didn't play a role in recommendations, because we're not going to do something just because it's scientifically interesting. There are health implications I already covered, and there are two axes that we now have in our way of approaching these assessments: the butyrate production potential, and you see that wording in the app, and the butyrate production activity. So the actual butyrate production, which we assess from the pathway activity. Nobody else will give you that. So again, this is a huge, huge value add and competitive differentiator, to the point that you can't even call the competition because nobody else basically does that. What others can tell you is your butyrate production potential coming from only the DNA assessment of who the butyrate producers are, how many of them they are, and how much of the total composition is butyrate producing organisms. That's about it. Now, what we can tell you, this is a whole other kind of orthogonal axis, is the butyrate production pathway activity, and that's where we measure these pathways thanks to the metatranscriptomic data. And now, if you imagine that on the microbial side, the butyrate producers, they can be higher than average or lower than average or just about average or medium level. You can have the same three levels, the big three buckets, for the pathway activity. So you can have low butyrate pathways, you can have medium butyrate pathway activity, and you can have higher than usual amount of butyrate pathway production as inferred from pathway activity. So if you do the math and you multiply 3 by 3, you can see that there are 9 actual buckets that can lead to different recommendations. What you see here, these are just kind of abbreviated, internally abbreviated types of recommendations, like PPs, polyphenol, and they're prebiotics, and sometimes you can actually give butyrate itself. These are not to be taken literally because there are different kinds of maybe other supplements that can be added, and we don't endorse any particular supplement line. So, but just in general, to give you a sense of how this all plays into recommendations, let's imagine this scenario. This one is kind of boring actually, because you have average production and you have average potential to produce, an average production. So you're smack in the middle right here in, we call it 2B internally, square. That is like this medium and taxa medium. So you would get one type of recommendation set. Now, what happens if you have low producers? So you have low activity from your butyrate producers, but you have, let's say, high or medium or high pathway activity. So it's like the function is telling us you're making a lot of butyrate, but you're like, I don't have enough butyrate producers according to you guys. So is there some conflicting evidence, or should I not trust it as much? Well, the point is because we have two separate independent orthogonal axes that give you that, this is actually where it gets more personalized. So you can have butyrate activity coming from maybe not the beneficial butyrate producers. They can be coming from some of the opportunistic guys. On rare occasion, they also will use some pathways to produce butyrate in the end. So butyrate overall is still good for you, but sometimes those other not so beneficial species, they can do it in pathway routes that produce some harmful byproducts like ammonia and other things, which are altogether less than optimal. So it could give you a sign that, hey, maybe there's some bad guys, and that would trigger our engine to look at, you know, the harmful versus beneficial microbiome balance and your overall diversity, like the variety of species there. So it's all part of a bigger integrative assessment that leads to recommendations. So what about the other extreme? So if you have really high levels of activity from butyrate producers, but you kind of have low or lower than usual function of butyrate production. And what happens? So it could be that they are truly there, but under the current circumstances, they're producing they're doing something else and they're just not producing a lot of butyrate. It could be that you're just not feeding them enough. So if you want them to really perform for you, the function that they're known to do so well, you need to give them more prebiotic. So you need to feed the good guys better, be a better host, okay? So you can give them more resistant starches that they love, so they can produce more short chain fatty acids, including butyrate for you. So in a nutshell, having these two axes, the potential and the pathway activity, so the pathway potential, so to speak, and the actual activity, gives us the ability to say whether you need to add more good guys or feed the good guys, or maybe take some butyrate on top of everything, especially if you have everything low, or worry more about the harmful or not so good guys and worry about the microbiome balance and balance it out. But basically, these are completely different approaches, and it could be different amounts of prebiotic versus probiotic or both, and for how long you would need to take that based on these insights derived from butyrate pathway assessments. So to help you kind of review what I just touched on, so some of the example interpretations for butyrate, I put together a little document that you can refer to. So the extreme examples are described here. What happens when, you know, the potential is low, but the pathway activity is high, and vice versa. Everything else is kind of in the middle. If everything is high, then, you know, you're doing overall really well. But the more contrasting examples, which are, I think, the most complex ones for our customers to understand, I've written them out. If you need more help and support with this, please let us know. There's also this article that was published by Naveen in Medium, and we made a lot of pathway examples, including this one on butyrate, and explaining why this metatranscriptomic technology is so unique in allowing us to do this, and how unique our pathway approaches are, which is also the unique value in analytics on top of the technology itself. So there's a table there that makes us, that highlights our differentiators. So the Viome metatranscriptomics analysis, one of the points that I think should be especially clear after this session is that we can make these assessments of biological pathway activities so that recommendations can be made with more molecular level precision. And we can correlate the activities of the microbes, so the organisms that are there, with specific functions that we measure using this unique pathway analysis. Okay, and we're the only ones that do that. So there's a hyperlink in my slide that leads you to that article. please use that and let us know if you need any more help guiding and navigating through the results that you see in the app. So I'm hoping that after this video, you feel more equipped to really understand and go through these insights that are provided for you in the app, and explain that to other customers about the butyrate and other pathway analysis insights and their role in our personalized recommendations. Thank you so much.